the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the Bliss Business Podcast. I'm Tullio, and today's topic really deserves some special attention. We talk about empathy, compassion, and love. We talk about bliss. Bliss stands for Build Love into Scalable System. That has been our topic since the fall of 2023. We've invited many guests and continue to have guests who are equally devoted to people-centric enterprises, where empathy isn't just a nice to have, it's a business imperative, a strategic approach to business. But if we want to bring all that down into something that changes how people actually experience work, it comes down to one word: grace. Grace at work. Grace is what empathy looks like when life hits hard. Grace is the moment we stop treating people like predictable resources and start treating them like human beings living real lives. And those lives are not neat. They're not linear. They're not always manageable. Grace is what we give when someone experiences a loss that is unbearable to them and traumatic. It is what we give when a parent is pulled in too many directions, running on fumes, trying to show up professionally while they're also managing sickness, stress, and the emotional weight of their family. Grace is what we give when someone is carrying something invisible and heavy, something they do not have the language to explain in a Slack message or a calendar invite. And here's the part we do not say out loud enough in business. Grace is not kindness. Grace is strategy, because the absence of grace is very expensive. It is expensive for people. It is expensive for teams. It is expensive for the business. When we do not give grace, we force people to perform while they are depleted. We force them to mask pain, hide stress, sometimes medicate in unhealthy ways, and we push them through situations that require care, time, and recovery. That creates a workplace where people do not feel safe to be honest. And when people cannot be honest, the organization loses signal. When the organization loses signal, decisions get worse. When decisions get worse, the business weakens. Grace protects the signal. Now let us get very real. There are losses and experiences in life that rearrange a person. They change a person. The death of a loved one, a serious diagnostic, a divorce, a child in crisis, a parent declining, a personal health event, anxiety that becomes unmanageable, depression that makes basic tasks feel impossible, a sick child, sleepless nights, and then another child dealing with suicidal ideation, where the parent is living in constant vigilance. In those moments, we can do one of two things in the workplace. We can pretend it is not happening and keep pushing for output, or we can pause and recognize humanity. Grace is choosing our humanity. And grace is not complicated. It sounds like, take time you need. We have you. We got you. Do not explain everything. You don't have to. We will cover for you. We will make a plan for when you're ready. That is grace. Now, some leaders hear this and immediately worry about performance. They worry about fairness. They worry about being taken advantage of. They worry about setting a precedent. And those concerns exist, but they often come from an outdated mindset, one that treats work like a factory system. 5 days a week, 40 hours, always on, always available, linear productivity. But that is an old model, and it's collapsing in real time. We do not live in the industrial economy anymore. Yet, many operating models today are still tied very much to the way things were done during the industrial economy. We live in a knowledge economy. And in a knowledge economy, productivity is not measured by hours. It is measured by clarity, creativity, energy, and the ability to make good decisions. When someone is emotionally depleted, they're not thinking clearly. When someone is overwhelmed, their cognitive bandwidth shrinks. When someone is masking pain, they're using mental energy just to appear fine. That energy is not available for problem solving. It's not available for collaboration. It is not available for creativity. It is not available for customers. So when leaders force people to keep going without grace, they're not protecting performance. They're borrowing performance at a high interest rate. And the bill always comes due. It comes due as burnout. It comes due as a mistake or multiple mistakes. It comes due as missed handoffs. It comes due as short tempers and conflicts. It comes due as withdrawal and disengagement. It comes due as turnover. And it comes due as people leaving quietly, mentally checked out long before they resign. Grace is how we avoid paying that bill. Now let us connect to Bliss. Bliss stands for Build Love into Scalable Systems. If love is operational, then grace is one of its most visible outputs. Grace is love with timing. Grace is love that creates room. Grace is love that understands that humans have seasons. Some seasons are high output. Some seasons are recovery. Some seasons are unpredictable. And some seasons require support. A scalable system does not pretend anyone is always at 100%. A scalable system is designed to flex. That is what makes it scalable. Because if the system only works when everyone is perfectly healthy and stable and uninterrupted, it is not a system. It is a fragile performance fantasy. So what does grace look like as a system? Grace is not just a leader being nice in a one-off situation. Grace becomes real when it is embedded in how work is designed. Here's a few practical components of grace at work. First, normalize conversation about capacity. Most teams do not talk about capacity honestly. People say yes because they do not want to disappoint anyone. They say yes because they do not feel safe enough to say no. They say yes because they are afraid it will affect their reputation. Grace-based teams normalize a different conversation. What is real this week? What is sustainable? What is a trade-off? And what needs to move? And finally, what support is needed? These questions are not weaknesses, they are maturity. Second, build coverage into the system. If one person being out for 2 days breaks the workflow, the system is under-designed. Grace requires resilience. That means cross-training, clear documentation, shared ownership, better handoffs, clear priorities, more collaboration, more equivalence. This is why I love self-managed systems. When the system is resilient, leaders do not panic when someone needs time. Teams do not resent each other because someone needs grace. Work does not collapse. Grace becomes easier because the system supports it. Third, separate hours from value. This is the biggest shift we all need to make in business. In many organizations, the unspoken currency is visibility. If someone's online and someone's in the office, they're seen as committed. If someone is out, they're seen as less committed. That is lazy leadership. Grace-based organizations measure outcomes and contribution, not constant presence. They ask, what did we deliver? What did we learn? What did we improve? What value did we create? When outcomes matter more than optics, people stop performing for appearances. And that is when authenticity rises. Fourth, build recovery into operating rhythms. If a team runs a maximum intensity indefinitely, it will break. That is not moral statement. That is biology. Grace-based organizations build rhythms that include reflection and recovery. They do not treat rest as a reward. They treat rest as a requirement for sustained performance. Fifth, develop leaders who can hold human complexity. This is non-negotiable. A lot of managers were taught to manage tasks, not humans. They were taught to drive deadlines, not navigate grief. They were taught to enforce policies, not hold trauma. Grace requires a high level of leadership capacity, a higher level of leadership capability. It requires empathy. It requires emotional regulation. It requires clear communication. It requires boundaries that protect the team while supporting the individual. It requires discernment. Grace is not permissiveness. Grace is support with clarity. So let us talk about the business outcomes of grace. This is where it gets real for organizations. Grace increases retention. People stay where they feel seen and supported. They leave where they feel used, disposable, or unsafe. Grace improves productivity, not in the short term, not in a weekly dashboard kind of way, but in a sustainable way. Someone who takes 2 or 3 days to recover from a hard personal moment often returns with energy, focus, and deeper loyalty. Someone forced to grind through trauma often returns with fatigue, resentment, and diminished capacity. Grace improves decision quality. When people feel safe, they tell the truth sooner. When people tell the truth sooner, problems get solved earlier. When problems get solved earlier, the business makes fewer costly mistakes. Grace improves collaboration. When people trust each other, they help each other. When they help each other, work moves without politics. When work moves without politics, speed increases. Grace also improves customer experience. Customers can feel when a team is stable, grounded, and aligned. They can also feel when a team is stressed, reactive, and brittle. Grace creates stability, and stability creates trust. Grace strengthens the employer brand. This matters in a world where talent is choosing workplaces based on humanity, flexibility, and meaning. Companies that do not evolve will lose strong people to companies that do. Now let us address the fear again, because it is real for leaders. What if people take advantage? And here's the honest answer. Some might, but most won't. Most do not. Most people want to contribute. Most people want to be proud of their work. Most people want to belong. And most people want to do meaningful things. When a company leads with suspicion, it creates a very fear-based behavior amongst everyone. When a company leads with trust and clear standards, it creates responsibility. Responsibility creates accountability. Grace does not mean no standards. Grace means flexible support inside clear standards. A grace-based culture can still expect accountability. It can still expect ownership. It can still expect performance. It simply recognizes that humans sometimes need space to be human. Now let us get into the concrete example, some concrete examples, okay? Imagine a parent whose child has been sick with the flu for a week. Sleep has been terrible, and they're behind. They're stressed. They're also trying to show up. Then imagine that another child of that same parent is showing signs of suicidal ideation. This is not a normal stressor. That is a crisis. That changes the entire emotional landscape of that person's life. If a workplace responds by saying, we still need you on that call. We still need that deliverable. You need to just push through all this. That workplace is not only being unkind, it's being unintelligent. Because that person will not be able to bring their best thinking, their best collaboration, or their best leadership in that moment. They're in survival mode. Now, grace-based leadership says something different. Grace-based leadership says, take the time you need. We will cover the work. We will replan. We're here to support you. That leader is protecting the person, yes, but they're also protecting the business because they're keeping the system healthy. Now, let us make this practical for all of you. Here are 3 moves to build grace into your business this month. Move 1, create a grace agreement. This is a short team agreement that says, when life hits hard, we support each other. We communicate early. We replan without blame. We protect privacy. We cover each other with respect. We do not weaponize vulnerability. That simple agreement changes the tone of an entire culture. Move 2, build a coverage plan for critical work. Identify the 3 most critical workflows in your team. For each one, define who is the backup, where's the documentation, what is the minimal viable handoff, and how do we keep working and how do we keep moving if someone is out. That is not bureaucracy. That is resilience. Now let's talk about move number 3. Redefine productivity for your team. Stop praising people for being always on. Stop praising hustle culture working 70 hours a week. Stop praising people for delivering outcomes because they outworked everybody else. And instead, start praising people for delivering outcomes sustainably. Ask, what outcomes did we create? What did we improve? What did we learn? What friction did we remove? Then introduce one recovering norm. For example, if someone has a high intensity week, they take a half a day the following week. If someone is in a personal crisis, they get flexible time without penalty. If a team has been pushing hard, leadership schedules a reflection and reset. That is how grace becomes a system. Now let us end with a bigger reflection. We're in a moment in time where technology is accelerating. AI is changing workflows. AI is changing the way we operate, the way we do things. And competition is getting faster and faster. The temptation is to treat people like machines. That is the wrong direction. The companies that will win are not the companies that squeeze the most hours out of humans. They're the companies that build the healthiest environments for humans to think, collaborate, and create. Grace is not a perk. Grace is not a luxury. Grace is not a nice to have. Grace is one of the most undervalued competitive advantage in modern business because grace builds loyalty. Grace builds trust. Grace builds resilience. Grace creates space for people to recover and return stronger. Grace turns work into a place where humans can thrive, not just survive. And when humans thrive, businesses thrive. Thank you for listening to the Bliss Business Podcast. Please join us again next week. We have 2 live episodes, one on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Pacific and one on Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific. And we also have a Marketing with Purpose series on Wednesdays at 8 a.m. Pacific. And you can also listen to my monologues, which air on Fridays. And if this episode resonated with you or touched you, please share it with others. And remember, always be graceful. Until next time, take care.